Campbell, welcome back. It's nice to have you.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you're like my alien go-to guy. I have a few alien friends, but at least you can like rationalize with me. A lot of times it's like, no, it's alien. So I'm like, hang on a second. Can we talk about like, some high advanced tech we've never seen before? Like nobody knew what the microwave was until they created the microwave. And then it's like, how could you ever live without just putting 30 seconds of heat into your food and then eating it and not expecting to get any brain waves or radioactive signals in there?
Well, that's very true. And microwaves are a great place to start too, because in my opinion, it has a lot to do with electromagnetism. So we can definitely dive into that.
So are you more the belief, like, because I know we talked about it a little bit the first time, but are you more belief of the fact that it's probably some type of electrical thing that happens on this earth that might be a natural occurrence we just haven't deciphered yet?
Uh, my opinion is that that's probably the case, and it's because of mainly the Project Condyne report, which is the UK government's top secret report that was declassified in 2006, where they say it's almost certain that these objects are electromagnetic phenomena. And that report was designed to, like, if the UK Prime Minister asked, like, oh, what are UFOs? That's the top secret report he'd be given. And we have that in our hands. It's declassified chain of ownership all the way back. You get it on the UK archives. So that's the main piece of evidence. And then there are the scientific reports from Hesdal in Norway and a few other places in the world where scientists say they have observed these things moving around. And, those aren't 100% verified scientific reports because you can't really lock these things down, right? But the combination of the government reports and the various science papers describing these electromagnetic phenomena, at least that's what they are saying that they believe they are. Those convince me when I look at the information.
When the government released the UAP stuff or started talking about it a little bit more openingly, like the Pentagon made a message about it. Do you think like a lot of people like which way did you take it? Because a lot of people took it in the sense of like, oh, they must be talking to us now, or it must be something because it must be right on the forefront. We're about to see something big. But to me, if there was an appearance of them in like the 1940s or something like that, nobody just ever stops researching into probably a global threat of that magnitude. I mean, we can look at like data mining, for instance. People saw the social dilemma. They're still doing it. They just don't talk about it. Like that's the thing is like something of that magnitude. They didn't just let that go off the radar. So they're preparing you for something. But I think it's just they probably have some advanced tech or
Mhm.
something that they're just like, let's just push this stuff out here so we can work on the next thing. Because at this point, they're probably so many steps ahead where it's like, all right, we got to slowly start releasing some. It's like if you had a warehouse and you started packing it after like 10 years, your warehouse is going to be jam packed. We're like, we got to get rid of some things to add some new things.
Yeah, true. Well, that's a good, I think you're on to something with the advanced tech. I think that's actually where this is headed. And I believe personally that that's sort of the heart of the matter. And a big part of that are the declassified government documents. A lot of UFO Twitter people, they are really into some of these leaked documents, and they don't have those leaked documents don't have like a verified chain of custody, so we aren't certain that those are accurate documents. I really like the declassified internal documents because they're kind of like the thoughts of an organization. They're like the way that, for example, the CIA transfers information from their working groups to their leadership, and those documents include like explanations for why they want to keep the subject top secret. So technology has always been, since the earliest, in the early 50s, the US government documents like related to Project Twinkle, which is a US Air Force intel project trying to study these things. And then the CIA in 1952 had a working group memo that once again described them as well, not specifically electromagnetic, but natural phenomena at that point. And they always said, we want to keep this stuff top secret because we don't know how much the Russians know about it. We suspect they might know more than we do. And we want to exploit maximally the radical innovations and advanced technologies that could be developed from these plasmoids because they contain so much energy, and the containment mechanism is not well understood. But if it can be deciphered, then it creates just an outrageous possibilities in terms of specifically fusion. And it's kind of interesting that fusion is increasingly, in my opinion, coming into the conversation more and more.
Do you think that it's like, at least in your kind of basic knowledge or understanding of this, do you think that there's any type of sightings from back in history that predates the, I guess, the Manhattan Project of alien occurrences or something of that sort? Because that's usually what UFO people bring to, is that once we kind of started firing off nukes or start kind of had this land leveling weapon in a way, that this is when we started seeing more appearances. And I'm looking at that like maybe it's a concept of this is something that if it is a natural phenomenon, maybe it's something that was man created though. Like earthquakes can be man created if you mine too far. Well, maybe this is something that maybe we somehow mess with the balance of Earth, either with light pollution or some type of atmospheric pollution that causes this
Yeah.
distorted, I guess, perception of maybe something that is like a an illusion or some type of hallucination, like when you get like when you see water randomly when you're driving and then it just
Yeah.
disappears. It's not evaporating that quickly. It's something that your mind's creating like an optical illusion. So I'm wondering if it's one of those things too, and it's somehow maybe it's I don't know, bad. Like, I have a crack in my microwave. If I'm heating up food and my head is right in front of it, that's not going to be good.
Yeah.
So maybe this type of atmospheric pollution or something is causing our vision. That's why a lot of people are wearing glasses a lot. Maybe not only from the screens, but maybe it's an aspect of like there's might be something out there that's affecting or messing with some type of chemical mechanism in our brain that's causing us to see these types of things or these phenomenon or weather phenomenon that might be a natural occurrence, or it just might be something that might be man created. Because I mean, from recorded history, I can't really predate or find anything way, way, way before about three lights in the sky or some type of beings. It's more recent, at least when newspapers were around, not back in like stone etched tablets, which you think somebody who's writing down history would mention a giant UFO saucer in the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the saucers seem to be one of the most rare of the occurrences, although, like, even some scientists, like Erling Strand, he's an associate uh, professor at Osvold University College in Norway near Hesdalen. He's seen, or at least he describes seeing a metallic looking disc flying. But that's a rare occurrence. Usually they're kind of like spherical. And there are examples of seeing like spheres in the sky. Are you familiar with the Nuremberg wood cuttings? They're from like I want to say like 1500, 1550, something like that. But they actually are these depictions of this seemingly, they described it as a religious kind of event, a supernatural event. But if you take the images of these spheres that they draw flying around in the sky, it actually looks quite similar to some of the photographs that some of these scientists have taken, and it could be interpreted that way. It's interesting that you also describe the water of illusion on hot asphalt, or because that's actually one of the mechanisms that's proposed to explain why sometimes these objects look metallic, because like the water actually being in the atmosphere could produce these illusions sometimes of, like, if I saw that on top of a sphere or a cylinder or something, it would look metallic. So there are these sort of natural physical processes that you can kind of point to suggest what's actually happening. And basically these things, according to the UK government, they're, these sort of very condensed points of energy, and we don't understand exactly what is, in their own reports they say we don't understand what's going on in the central nucleus. Like, we don't know how it is holding itself together, and that's the key to unlocking fusion power. And that's what the British report actually is one of the most interesting on that subject, because they explicitly lay out in several paragraphs, and it's the Project Condyne report, and it's on the UK National Archives. They say exactly that: we don't know how much the Russians know. We think they know more than we do. We need to get on this. And then it says all like top technology managers at Ministry of Defense have been briefed on this report. We are proceeding with, and then they list like a sequence of these super advanced technologies. And this was completed back in 2000. And what's really cool is that when you look at the news these days, you can find some of the things they describe. So, like the U.S. government, you can, I think it's the debrief. I can't remember which one, but they're like these plasma UFOs in quotes that they've developed. The fighter jets using lasers, I think, that intersect can create a high energy ball of plasma that redirects certain missiles. And then there's also there's a really cool weapon or device called it projects a plasma ball then through lasers and these plasmoids, and it's actually consistent with ball lightning self-reports. They can go through glass and other mediums. So this is a plasma ball they can project, they can direct where it is in space, in the atmosphere, and then they can send it through a window, and then through the laser they can transmit information and actually make the plasma ball emit sound and speak. So it's being described as it sounds outrageous, but it's actually just like you look it up and it's just being described in mainstream news articles that they've said that they've developed this thing, and it's potentially for crowd control and like hostage situations. They just send a plasma ball in there and talk directly to you. It's like they're doing these things and it's just wild.
I know there's secret sectors of the government that studies like laser weaponry and
Mhm.
things of that sort. Thinking more on the weather phenomenon,
Yes.
a long time ago on the projects, there was Operation Sea Spray, which was over San Francisco, where they sprayed a chemical to kind of dim particles in the clouds to stop hurricanes or to at least alleviate some of the rain or some of the harsh storm conditions that were happening. And then a bunch of people went to the hospital complaining of chest conditions or some type of medical thing that they could never really pin on Operation Sea Spray. I look at it like a weird thing happened during the pandemic where this lab idea was talked about. And it's kind of been picking up more steam as we go along further and further. But what is one natural disaster China has always been known for?
What, floods? I'm not sure.
Starts with
What are you
it's
thinking of?
earthquakes.
Okay.
They
Yeah. Well,
constantly
true.
have earthquakes. And I have a buddy out there who studies memorial grave sites in Japan. And he messaged me. He was like, I know you were joking about government controlling weather, but we always have like earthquakes. And then near the lab, there was two tornadoes that happened back to
Hmm.
back that destroyed the wet market and destroyed a bunch of things once the WHO wanted to continue their investigation into the institute. So it was might have been coincidence, might have been. I'm not saying the government controls, weather manipulational things, but is it out of the realm of possibility considering at one point they were having plans of making these runs into hurricanes by dissipating particles inside them to reduce the size of them? And this is 50, 40 years ago. So what I'm saying is it goes back to the original point is why would they just stop researching something like that? A long time ago, Russia was conducting these projects, creating psychological warriors, which there's actually a movie you can look up called Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney. That happened about an hour away from where I live, where they kept the goats at this shelter and they were trying to create Jedis by using the power of like thinking and positive vibrations and all these things to be able to stop wars before battles are even fought. Now, Russia gave up on it, but did they? Because, looking deeper and deeper into stuff, there's a lot of signs when it comes into manipulation in that video, in that podcast I sent you, where the
Mhm.
KGB guy, I think his name was Yuri Bezmenov, he was talking about ways to decentralize and cause a whole generation. It's a 20-year process of causing you to destroy I mean, that's happening now. That's things that are kids that are, my age and stuff like that, that are trying their hardest to, I guess, stand for an idea, but maybe they've been brainwashed to just hate their own country and destroy it and tear it up more apart, which is a good war tactic. Where I start to look at like maybe the weather phenomenon thing might be man kind of manipulated in a way that might have an I guess intentional or is it unintentional? Yeah, unintentional coincidence or consequence, which might be the fact that it causes these weird manipulations. It causes a lot of these health issues that are happening. I mean, the sugar industry didn't plan to get people fat by, putting sugar in the food. It was just to make it taste better. And then you eventually learn. I mean, the fact is, if you look at human history, war has been fought over salt.
Mhm.
Do you think they're not going to try and find ways to manipulate or get an advantage over someone just for something else?
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely onto something there, and I suspect it's exactly what you're saying. They don't stop the research; they sort of shuffle it around, and there's a lot of there are good reasons from a government perspective why they want to kind of keep this stuff moving around. For one big thing, and the freedom of information documents, like when you can get these secret documents declassified, it does show you a lot of information if you are looking at the details. And there's I mean, it's been well studied, but there is a movement from government to private sector because freedom of information laws don't apply to a private company. So these top secret programs, have been moved over time into private sector contracts, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One of them, once again, like it's hard to distinguish coincidence from intentionality, right? But there's advantages to personally to the government to having moved these things into these private companies in terms of hiding and classifying and compartmentalizing, keeping everybody talking to each other. And then they can, I mean, this is speculation, but if you have like a group of scientists working on like a plasma based technology, and maybe it would be convenient to hint to those scientists because they're just working on the data, but then you can hint that it's a UFO derived technology. They then the foreign intelligence services are sort of thrown off the scent that you can actually like potentially study these phenomena in the atmosphere. And there are some really interesting paths you can take on that. And I just recalled you mentioned the idea of potentially there are things in the atmosphere like atmospheric dust or something contributing, and that's actually it's neat that you said that because it's exactly what the UK Ministry of Defense in 2000 in their secret report identified. They think that these objects are increasing in frequency because of things like industrial pollution, because if it's cold dusty plasma, which is what they're describing, it means that you combine basically a radiation source with atmospheric dust of certain types, and you can irradiate it. In labs, they use microwaves on dusty particles, and they produce these little plasmoids that, for all intents and purposes, resemble UFOs. So they actually are describing that human behavior might contribute. And another good example of that would be Foo Fighters from World War II, right? These balls of light apparently that are chasing and circling and all these things, these bombers. And over Europe in World War II, especially when the huge bomber waves were going over, the amount of atmospheric dust was just off the charts. Plus, the radar systems that they were using even to guide the bombers, they're all microwaves. So it's actually microwaves and dust, and then you have this off the charts level of sightings that you can't really look to anywhere else, but the conditions were perfect and consistent with what they're describing.
There's a during that podcast I sent you, he talked about the weaponizing space. Space is already weaponized on a concept of people stealing other data and all this stuff from other people's satellites, China, for instance. Now, if you're talking about laser weaponry, for instance, how long until they're able to manipulate or project certain things, just basis of turning your thing and then pointing blame or whatever at a country. For instance, a long time ago, the way that we would solve of where to put our labor factories were in places with their weather conditions were, I would say, dog shit. And what I mean by that is if you look in Pittsburgh, their weather's not the best, but that's where all the steel mill factories are. Seattle is also another big one as well too because of the weather climate there. They thought that back in the day if they had satellites or some type of thing, they couldn't see through the clouds, which we know now is not really possible with the tech advancement. But I look at it like, is that if our technology, for instance, lasers or whatever, could be able to spy on other people, you would see more explosions or more incidences where metal was falling from the sky if there was some type of UFO or some type of alien species that could monitor these things. We don't ever hear about a satellite that goes missing. We hear about a satellite that gets decommissioned. But I mean, you can't just conclude all that up there to be space junk. When things are falling down from the sky, that would be some type of attack, which I feel like would be a national threat that people would have to be addressed to. You hear a lot of stories, and it's very difficult not to side yourself on the aspect that there might not be aliens, only because everything in every movie and every popular culture thing has involved aliens. But if you look at space, and all these nebulas or galaxies or whatever, you can really see pure beauty in something that you can't even fathom into words because it's just so magnificent. So is it hard to believe that you can create a off-brand version of that on Earth, which comes from these factories? I mean, for the longest time, there's an idea of clean coal plants now, and nothing is clean. But in America, we have such giant filters on these coal factories that it actually comes out a little bit cleaner than a lot of the other places that mass produce these things to the point where you can't breathe in your own place. Where in Beijing or whatever, they have to get bottles of air and breathe into those because it's clean air. That's a sellable object over there. Now, over here, for instance, there's a lot of incidences of weather occurrences or when it's sunny and it's raining out, and you're like, oh, it's a must be a rare day. No, it's because you're kind of throwing the earth in this weird kind of temporal loop where it seems like it's having its period or it's menstruating and it's trying to figure out what the hell it kind of is doing with its thing. It's kind of resetting itself. And we keep throwing it into this kind of shift where now I'm starting to see the issue with climate change. But I don't know how maybe popularizing we need to save the climate and save the climate and go green, because it seems like with carbon emissions, carbon's good for plants, but it's bad for human life. But you notice, like, the not to get into the conspiracy and maybe the conspiracy side of things, but you notice how they used to say carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and now they've just labeled everything carbon, and we need to put a tax on carbon emissions. We need to do this. Well, aren't people carbon? So you start to see where the line kind of gets drawn, and like just the dumbing down of words starts to, you start seeing more, I guess, where people would say government like fuckery a little bit, because of the aspect is now that you dumb down the languages, you start to cut syllables. You say GTG and say got to go. When this all starts happening, it's not only a dumbing of society or dumbing of speech, but you start to see a lot of mistakes start to happen. I mean, a long time ago, doctors used to write prescriptions, and it still happens today, but doctors would write prescriptions so fast in illegible handwriting so they could never be blamed for a certain thing if something got slipped up.
Right. Yeah, and there's incentives in industry to describe it in a certain way, right? Like I imagine the cattle industry would have an incentive to label things carbon, even though methane is a much more effective greenhouse gas and potentially more dangerous in some respects. So everything's incentivized for people to sort of like corrupt the information channels, and that exists same with UFOs. Like there's a lot of incentive from a counterintelligence perspective to corrupt the information channels. And like there's the Richard Doty thing with the United States Air Force intelligence. It's unclear exactly how much how clear that agent was operating within or outside the lines, but there's undeniably advantages to sort of muddying the waters. Like, for example, you have Russian generals and admirals in interviews. They talk about how they believe in ET UFOs, and so the intelligence advantage from potentially sort of throwing people off by describing these things like, oh, we don't know, while in their own secret documents they're saying like, okay, we do know, and this is what we're doing about it, and XYZ. So there's a lot of evidence there, and it's crazy how many things that this really ties into, because like we're saying, it is potentially like based around industrial pollution in part. Like microwave radar technology would increase the prevalence, and
Why
that
every astronomer hates Elon Musk.
yeah, right, yeah, polluting the air. It's like there's pollution everywhere, and an interesting kind of potential conclusion to this is the fusion side of things, because I mean, I struggle to think of something that would be more revolutionary than fusion power. It's a pure energy, clean energy, infinite energy. If we could actually master that technology, it would transform the world in a way that I can't conceive of. It's like the internet times 1,000, right? Like on that podcast you sent me, they were talking about like no one, even in the most creative science fictions, like they never thought of something like the internet. It's inconceivable. And I really see this movement towards potentially fusion as being very similar. Like, I mean, if there's no energy cost to manufacturing, like I mean, the sky's the limit. I can't even conceive of it. So there's just such a fascinating possibility there that a lot of people on UFO Twitter are very displeased by the sort of I don't know what you want to call it, the natural hypothesis, the plasma hypothesis. But I think that it's actually very exciting in its own right, because it could save the, like, I don't want to be extreme, but it could really save us from so many of these things that are really causing us problems. And I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, though, because the American economy, well, the global economy is, heavily just tied to energy production and the transfer of energy, commodities and things like that on international markets. And the United States dollar is very closely tied to international demand for US dollars in order to buy energy. And if the oil industry gets sort of like, shut down fully overnight, if fusion comes out as being real, then we're going to see a thing where the international demand for US dollars might like dry up. And then because there's no underlying kind of gold standard, right? The value is in the demand. It could lead to a really serious collapse of the U.S. economy and therefore the global economy. And in my opinion, this is a bit more of the conspiracy stuff. But since we're talking about UFOs, why not? Right? Let's dive in.
Yeah.
The a justification of, and in my opinion, a good justification. Now, you're not justified to destroy the world, but I can understand it. Is that if fusion technology did come out, then the United States would potentially no longer be the solitary global superpower. And if you're operating purely from the standpoint that I want to preserve the United States position as the strongest nation on earth because we believe that we are the best people to be in that position, there's a huge threat there to unleashing fusion power on the world, because potentially it might eliminate the current money system that we have. That's out there, though, obviously.
I'm the type of person that would like it if the United States took a back seat. Like, I don't think we need to be number one as much as everyone wants to be number one or seen as like a global super outlet. Because if we look at things like with the border, for instance, why do we have Haitian people coming over here? I mean, it's not saying they're not invited, but it's an aspect of like you have to go through a lot of fucking different other places to get here. Like it's
Mhm.
not, that's what I'm saying is like this has become like the global hotspot. So if you are scared of getting COVID, then does it make like usually when your country's in distress, which is I'm pro if people want to leave their country and search for a better life, we should let them in, whatever. But you start to look at like you have to go, you're supposed to, if your country's in distress and you're leaving there, you're supposed to try and find the next safe harbor, which goes back to the podcast we were talking about with Mike Baker. He talked about the next safe harbor. Well, these people are going from safe harbor to safe harbor to safe harbor to safe harbor, like 15 other different places to get here.
Mhm.
And then this is where we start to have the issue of like, doesn't that with spread anything like that? You're going to multiple different places. It's like if I stay in a bunch of different 3-star motel rooms, you're not going to think I'm going to be clean afterwards. You know what I'm saying? And we hit this level where it seems like we want to do everything we possibly can to be in the eyes of everybody. And I think this is where we need to take a back seat. Maybe this whole entire push for going electric is a propaganda thing. Maybe fossil fuels is always going to be the main thing to look forward to. But it kind of leads into like, if we're going to say conspiracies, Alec Jones was saying a long time ago about how to make these transmission wires for these electric cars actually costs a lot of carbon. So
Mhm.
it creates a global greening, which is where plants start to go huge and plant levels are pretty high. Necessarily, do they mean it's healthy version of plants, which would be like the natural way of growing them, or just kind of government controlled growing? That's obviously a different kind of debate there, but may, we're close to another global reset, in my opinion. I mean, if we look at the factors of like another ice age happening, well, what's the benefit for the government, wanting another ice age to happen? Well, who's got an underground bunker that, they got multiple of those? People didn't believe Area 51 existed. Now, it's obviously hypothetical, but it kind of leads into the movie Snowpiercer, where it's
Mhm.
like you got this whole entire reset, population kind of goes away. Most of the population is going to be confined to a certain spot, and it's going to be a bunch of people who are, already running things that are going to be the ones that are going to be in charge most of the time, but it's going to kind of extend the branches out a little bit. I don't know if that's true. I hope it's not true. But then it wouldn't make sense if we're trying to go electric cars. Why would we give up Afghanistan, which has been known to have that prized lithium that everyone really appreciates? You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
we start to land in this weird territory where you start questioning moves that are happening. I mean, necessarily it was important that we did pull out of there because trying to change another country or bring them democracy in a way is not, shouldn't be our fucking job. But we did it because at that point when 9/11 happened, it just seemed like we had to find a terrorist or find where this thing came from and stop this terroristic threat. And necessarily, should we been there 20 years? I don't think so. But when you look at where the lithium is, where the giant ease of access for control and trade is there. Doesn't make sense to just go away because, you want to pull out troops because it's been 20 years. They fought wars for hundreds of years. They don't care. So I start to look at where the big question is like maybe this is propaganda that everyone's using for this giant electric push, because I don't see them taking out the biggest and what a lot of people say is the biggest cause of climate change, which is cows. If you really wanted to change that, you would slowly breed out the meat industry. You would try and find alternative methods or ways to just produce one food rather than chickens, cows, and all these different types of varieties they like to have. I mean, have you looked up how many chickens are killed on a Super Bowl Sunday? That's like what people eat like 30 something wings by themselves easy. I can. How many
Yeah.
wings is a chicken? Two is a chicken. You know how many? So I just picture mass graves or like slaughterhouses of just farms of bases of chickens just stacked on top of each other. I mean, there was a guy, and I think a state away from me that killed over 6,500 something chickens by just going nuts and going crazy with a gun and just walking in and shooting all these fucking chickens. And they're so small that a bullet will go right through one or like five of them. So you start looking at like, what is like the why is this all still happening? Where's the phasing out of certain things? You start to look at, they prioritize what everyone would consider. If you say what's causing climate change, if you're not vegan, you're probably going to say cars. If you are vegan, you're going to say cows. So there you go, right there. Cows, cars, cows, car. Like the fucking language, man. It makes it so hard to track what the real original issue is or the manipulational tactics. And I think I'm starting to think this way more and more now after that episode, because I was noticing the fight at the forefront, the one that's the politicians moving money and losing money. That's obvious for a lot of people to see if they look into it. But what about the side manipulation, the fact that AI or technology is working in the backdrop and we're starting to see this slow burn of its success where AI algorithms are able to censor things and able to keep advancing and growing to a point where it might find ways to make it almost damn near impossible to see anything that's going on behind the back curtain. The Illuminati kind of theory out there as well too. There's a weird shift where I start looking at, wouldn't the best conspiracy be to create an alien type thing that everyone already wants to believe in, to believe that there's something bigger out there that could unite us, when really it's a fact that you fucked up the planet and you're refusing to take the receipt for the damages that you have caused.
Yeah, I really do. I feel strongly sort of along the similar lines. I think there's there's so much that provides advantage to the idea of sort of mixing up the message and conflating things and making it hard to sort of discern what exactly is going on. That's a well-studied strategy in counterintelligence that works very well. And it's worth noting that that strategy has worked quite well internationally. Like I mentioned, the example, like you have Russian generals giving interviews talking about believing in aliens, and that just throws everybody off the trail. The Americans can kind of intimidate people by making them wonder if, when these objects do appear, whether it's an American super weapon. And it's actually interesting because the American the declassified documents from the early 50s, late 40s, there's a really cool one called the Vital Installations Memo by the FBI, and I believe it was 1949 that was published. And they're saying in it, these objects are real. We aren't arguing that anymore. We don't know exactly what they are. It looks like they might actually be Soviet super weapons because we keep detecting them near our nuclear test facilities and things like that. So
Well, if
the
aliens
Russian.
are real, do you think that why wouldn't the government talk about the men in black? Why wouldn't they bring them up or address that? Yes, we have a team that is working on studying
Mhm.
these extraterrestrial, whatever, unidentified aerial phenomenon. They have scientists and people that are already studying the sky, looking and talking about this. Maybe they pay a scientist here or there, but I don't hear a Space Force style team that's addressed to this problem. We've heard glimpses and stories of men in black throughout probably the 1940s and 50s, talking about black Cadillacs and people with no like facial features that look like they phased down their eyebrows, their ears, their tongue, their nose, their lips. All these things have been flattened like someone who was burned, so the person couldn't be identified through facial recognition. But you start to enter this thing like, I didn't know we had cameras in the 1950s and 40s. I didn't know we had this type of technology, but you see a lot of pictures where you start to wonder if like, is this something that like maybe is it real or is it just kind of like this fake conspiracy like Bigfoot? It might be a person in a suit. I don't know. But I'm really strange or kind of curious on the aspect of why hasn't the government addressed that there is a Men in Black or there is a research team when there's open information that you can find about the Center for it's the Center for Cancer Study or something like that. But what they're doing isn't studying for cancer. There's five people that get like I think like $5.5 million a year, and they're just there to study AI and existential risk. So they just watch, see what technology or innovations are happening, and they try and predict to see if this is going to cause like a global Skynet type situation. So I'm like, if you have that scenario, which lets people speculate on the fact that you're probably dealing with AI that's almost out of your control, then why haven't you addressed the fact that you might have a Men in Black to might deal with an issue that might be a national or global threat, which could be aliens? Because from what I've heard experience wise, they don't. A lot of people who talk about being experienced or captured by these aliens
Mhm.
talk about how it's not like a good feeling. It's not like how you see on TV where everyone's like, they showed us such love. They talk about like they took me out of my home.
Mhm.
So you start to get this thing as like if something that's that threatening and you can look up alien accounts, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's just a fact that people have a distorted kind of reality because as long as you believe or brainwash into something, such as like, I remember I met Michael Jordan one time, and you're like, you met Michael Jordan? Yeah, I went to a basketball game and met Michael Jordan. Robbie, you've never been to a basketball game and you've never met Michael Jordan. But was that a dream? You see where it starts to get kind of crazy? So like
Yeah.
I don't know because I don't want to discount their stories, but I
Mhm.
also it's very like we talked about before, it's hard to trust eyewitness accounts where I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there is a national fear like that or something that can't be explained. Now you can keep it secret like Mike Baker was talking about. You can keep it secret for a while, but you can't keep it secret for a really long time, which I mean if we estimate from the 1940s or 50s, that's long enough, I think.
Yeah, well, and that makes it really interesting because you're right. Like I when I started looking at this stuff, it was actually just in the spring when I got really involved because in 2017, the whole thing with the New York Times, I became like interested, but I wasn't really like devoting time to it. And then when former President Obama described that there actually this spring there actually are objects in the Earth's atmosphere that he says we don't know what they are, we can't explain how they move, their trajectories. That made me take it really seriously, and so when I dove into it, and once I accepted that the objects do exist, or at least are very likely to exist, and that is in part built on eyewitness testimony. I started to try to question, well, okay, what could actually produce what we're seeing? And my first thought for quite like for a while, and I was arguing against people, it was that, oh, this is almost certainly has to be some kind of controlled craft based on the observations. And it's only after I kept taking it seriously and started, just kept reading information. And that's how I came across like this, pile of declassified government documents. So It's a really weird thing because on one hand, it's like, yeah, how could they keep it secret for so long? But then on the other hand, you go into the government archives, like the UK National Archives, and then you can find a declassified top secret document that was they are fought in court extensively, the Ministry of Defense, to try to block its release because a researcher successfully got it pulled up based on the keywords they asked for. And then the Ministry of Defense was like, oh shit, like trying to stop it in the courts. And the judges, in part, potentially because they didn't fully understand the implications, because it comes off as so just wild and unbelievable, they did allow its release. And so in 2006, we actually have the top secret UK government document that would be provided to the prime minister. I mean, I can't get away from this part. This is why I'm so confident, not certain, but confident that this is an accurate representation. Because if the UK prime minister sat down with the Ministry of Defense and was like, tell me what UFOs are, they would be shown this document, the Project Condyne report, that says these objects, and they're, I'll put it, indisputably exist, is what they say. Indisputable, I mean, it's still disputed. And then they say almost certainly natural physical electromagnetic phenomena that have the ability to hover, land, take off at exceptional velocities and vanish, this and that, outmaneuver any known aircraft or missile. So it's like, I don't know how anyone gets away from that. And it's in the public realm. So it's not even like secret anymore. But nobody, like in the UFO Twitter, I've had so many conversations with people.
You gotta
People
be
don't want to
careful.
look
Tread
at
lightly on that UFO Twitter.
it.
That's some danger. There's already people that are already want it to be this one thing, and now there are some people in that group that don't want it to be like, or they talk about a more rational, I guess, explanation. But since we talked, I had joined a past guest UFO Twitter space, and a guy who directed Skinwalker Ranch was in there. He goes, "Yes, if you have all these accounts of people seeing something, inviting news stations to talk about this, and then at last minute they cancel it. So if somebody got to them, doesn't mean they can't just find somebody who's like willing to risk their whole career or their livelihood, an Edward Snowden type, and whistleblow. And I think maybe that's the issue, like we were talking about off air, was Facebook might have had a whistleblower that might have caused this whole unplug off of Facebook and Instagram for it to go down all day that everyone cares about. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why like these algorithms are so tough in banning a lot of stuff, because once you keep digging, you might find some things you're not supposed to. See, the government might not do everything or do all these types of things in front of you, but they'll pay people to do it. Where it's like you start investigating people and you're like, for instance, like Opie and Anthony, that old radio show that used to be on air, he talks about like radio used to be able to joke and say whatever the hell you want, and then they used to like fake suspend you with pay, but they would do it on air like this giant thing, like you said something bad, you have to be punished, then you'd be right back after a couple weeks. But then they actually started suspending you because the sponsors started to get a little bit fussy with things, because you start realizing if you say this and it leads to this, well, this oil company that sponsors you, well, then diapers don't sell. It's like, well, why aren't the diapers selling? Because they're intertied with these people that work at a laundry service that deal with these people, and they're all connected businesses, much like the media companies. For instance, the cable companies, there's a giant thing of you can't have a monopoly. That's true. So they get a bunch of different people that all work hand in hand. When one person raises their prices, they all raise their prices. When one person decreases, they all decrease. That's the weird, sketchy territory you got to look at. It's a silent monopoly. And I think that's littered throughout the world. And I think it's not really, I guess, known because not a lot of people give a shit. I mean, if you look at Obama's what he did in office, did you know one of the things when trying to find Osama bin Laden was he used people to remote view? Like remote
I've never
viewing
heard
of
that.
just
Wow.
speculating between where and when, because this is what got me interested in the psychological stuff when we go back to the beginning of what we were talking about. They don't just stop, they keep going. So if they stopped in whenever Men Who Stare at Goats happened, like the 1990s or something like that, then why in 2014 is Obama also talking to people to help remote view and find Osama bin Laden's location? Which remote viewing is just like he could be in this area or between this town or between this town. He's in this general proximity. It's like that's fucking 4 countries. No shit. He's probably in there because we know he's in this one,
Yeah,
allegedly.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think you're 100% right. I think the government does just continue with things and they move things around. I mean, even with the yeah, the UFO investigative body in the government, the spokesperson Susan Gao of the Pentagon, she originally, said, oh, Lou Elizondo, the former director of the ATIP, the UFO program there at the Pentagon, like, he is the director, and then, oh nope, he's not the director, or he wasn't. This organization was under the Pentagon. Oh no, it wasn't. Just mixing everything together, and then to the point where Lou Elizondo went and got Harry Reid, the guy, the Senate majority leader and chair of the Intelligence Committee, who created the program, to write a letter saying, oh, yeah, this guy was in charge of this program that did exist. Without Harry Reid having gone out of his way to do that, it would still be questionable. And I'm sure the Pentagon information, organized, the part of them involved in that, are not happy with that. Like him or hate him, Noam Chomsky talks a lot about this in his philosophy, and you don't have to like everything he says around most of things, but he makes
That's
a
it's
really
his
good
name is what gets me every
Chomsky.
time.
Yeah, I know. It's like you say the name and it's just like an instant thing. But he has some interesting political philosophy. And one thing that really strikes me that he says in a speech somewhere is that you don't need people to sit down in a room together to conspire. A group of people with common interests will be indistinguishable from people who have sat down in a room together to conspire. So I think, like, it's like you were talking about price fixing and things like the gas companies don't need to sit down together necessarily and communicate. They can kind of like they operate together as though they are one, even though they are discrete entities. So I think that is a big factor of what's going on, and that's a big part of the entire global economy. The people on top, they don't have any incentive to mix things up. Like if I was Jimmy Carter ran for president, in a small part of his pledge was that he would disclose UFO stuff. He himself had a sighting that he reported to a UFO reporting organization. It was a group of people in him at a lodge meeting of some kind, and they saw some kind of UFO phenomena. And then when he became president, he did not do that. And so it's a bit of a mixed bag. But if you're the United States president and then you're fully informed on the subject, and let's just speculate, or let's just imagine for a moment that what I'm saying is correct. I'm not saying that it absolutely is, but if he got in as president and was like, okay, tell me everything about the UFOs, and they gave him something akin to the United Kingdom's Project Condyne report, and it's like, these are electromagnetic phenomena, we're trying to exploit them technologically on all these ways. We don't know where the Russians are with their science, but we're worried that they might be ahead of us on this. The incentive to release that information kind of dissipates. Also, when you add in this sort of more conceptual idea, I mentioned that with the introduction of fusion power, the United States is stranglehold on the global economy, which net advantage certainly in terms of freedom and things like that. So but if you see that it might actually impact the potential of the U.S. economy to remain in power, and it might actually cause a collapse conceptually, as president, I would almost argue that it might be treasonous to disclose UFO data if you knew that much, right? Because if you're the president, you've sworn an oath to protect the United States. And even if it means costing the United States, or the United States causing the world to collapse via climate change, the United States would still be on top of that dynamic. Whereas if you introduce fusion, you could have a real mix up of who's in charge. And so, I think that there's a lot going on under the, under the veil or whatever in that sense.
Well, we look at Snowden, for instance. Now, Snowden is a criminal because what he did is illegal, but what we're considering illegal is just things the government deems that you can't do. Murder is
Mhm.
wrong, sure, but is exposing government spying and NSA style techniques where they're able to find your data and sell that, which is your personal identification. Your social security number could be included in that as well, too. A lot of people don't even really know what data is. I think this is where I start getting a little bit nervous on the national threat scale of things, is because I think people kind of say, well, we might have a stranglehold on the economy. I don't really think so because I've read a lot into the CCP government, the Chinese government, and all their regulations and types of trade things that they do. We have so many sanctions to stop them from doing a lot of their acts, for instance. They still have Uyghur Muslim camps. that are just sitting there, of just people that just get taken from their home for accessing a VPN. I read a story about a 23-year-old girl my age that was just logging into, this VPN thing, doing her college stuff. Next thing you know, a couple hours later, she hears a at her door, opens it up, and then she's gone for a year and a half and was put into one of these camps where they shaved her head. She lost all funding, got into debt with her school, lost her scholarship, or lost I guess not attending classes. She ended up losing her educational degree.
Right.
But they also, before she left, they asked to see a medical examination of her to make sure she was okay to go back into society and she wasn't damaged from the camp. They put her under, she woke up, and they took away her ability to have kids. We have sanctions for these particular reasons, that sanctions that might be on just the essence of business, where if they try and ship human hair over here, we say no, you can't do that. They call us racist because this was the time, and I think during the Asian hate movement, they sent a ship of 13 tons of human hair off the coast of San Francisco, which Trump's at the time was in office. He denied and sent back, and they called us, Asian hate for being racist. Nike did the same thing of questioning where the people who are they getting paid enough money to make their shoes for them, and they said racist and put a ban on Nike as well too. These sanctions are important because it stops them from doing these types of things where it's like, well, we're not going to do business with you, but we need their business. They hold the power in this aspect of things, but we can find ways and little plot holes to stop them from doing this type of business. So the global economy is kind of a back and forth pendulum scale between America, UK, whoever. There are some less dominating countries like Canada that kind of have a presence in the market, but not as capitalistic as I would say America or China does, for
Mhm.
instance. Now, here's where we start kind of leaning out of the financial part of the territory, and you start looking at like, how come we're so willing to care or want to know, or go against the government to find these ideals, when you look at a place like China that is known that if you speak out against the government you're fucking gone. um you start to look at like, maybe where I'm from isn't just a place that we can fight all the time. You start to look at the benefits of it. I know that podcast I was telling you about, the insurrection aspect of things too, from the KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov, was talking about a 20-year process. There's a way to stop and turn that around, and I want people to understand that, because as much as UFO Twitter, like I said, tread lightly, it's a long walk for a short drink of water, bear with me, but it brings to this example, is that there's so much combativeness in UFO Twitter. I mean, even being in a lot of these spaces, which I like to join from time to time, I think it's a beneficial, fun thing to do. But then you start hearing arguments where people are like, well, how do you know it's not that? I know people that believe it's religion. They think it's a God
Mhm.
thing. And then I know people that just like having fun in the topic, much like me and you. And then there's people that believe 100% it's aliens, and anybody who's not is a fucking enemy and they have to kill them. And I'm like, you start to see this battle in this where I'm hearing people go like, why are you being so aggressive? And you start to see the conflict start to happen. I'm like, is that any way to get a civil discourse or some type of major national threat or some type of idea of a existential being or something like that discovered? No, it's not. You're not even fighting with the government or the main people that hold this information. The reason why we don't have a giant UFO report that's longer than 8 pages or something that goes really condensed and really easy is because of that fact it's a national security risk. You're giving information that we have that's private that might be good for us to know, but at the same time, it's not good for other countries to know because we don't think on a global scale. We think about the country that we're in. The only thing that we think of is expanding our country out globally, which necessarily is not always in the best, I guess, means or terms. But I think there's a very big divisiveness on the aspect of people want to destroy the place that they're from. I'm a patriot at heart. I stand for America. I stand for any country, really. I stand for the idea to be free and be whoever you want to be, which is an American ideal. But the way that people have twisted it is that it's not the ideal. The ideal is about certain races getting ahead of other races. Now, if there's an issue with that, it needs to be addressed, but that's not what America is about. And I think that's important because I'm getting like a sense of patriotism here. But I think it's important to understand is that we're all trying to make a peace in this world, and I see so much fighting, especially with something like UFO Twitter as well too, which is supposed to be a fun topic to talk about because we don't have all the information over it. It starts to get angry for me because I translate that to the same thing as like dealing with the lab or dealing with the virus as well too. How divisive that got in such a short amount of time, and nobody's looking at the people that should be held accountable or the people that are lying, that are perfectly not being held responsible for their actions. They're more than happy to spread misinformation, which we lead into the government, for instance. If there's people that are able to be paid to, do something for the government or do these types of things. How come nobody's looking at the fact that there might be people out there that have age of provocateurs, which is the fact of just people that are out there to sow misinformation or spread lies, or politicians that could possibly doing the same thing. We've seen politicians recently lie on the TV, and we all know about it. The Pandora Papers that just came out, all those people that are addressing that all these things of siding on different legislative acts that they shouldn't have been, all this tax fraud, all this stuff that they were involved into that judgment decision, and they had a bias in it. I mean, you start to look at like so a family member of mine runs a radio show. They have a guy that comes in, they call him Z-Man. Nobody knows his real name. Apparently works for like a secret clearance part of the government, whichever, what you want to take that at face value, sure. But there was apparently something in the 1940s about some alien encounter. Guy's name starts with a V or something like that. I don't know the whole details to it because I just was half paying attention when they told me. But they talk about like, oh, 2024 is when there's going to be this global change. And then like, that's what he keeps saying. He's been saying it for 5-6 years now. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, but is it possible that you go and get this person that's supposed to know all this confidential government shit, all this secrecy and aliens, that's just out there dropping hints and notes in different Twitter spaces or different areas, necessarily to the point they might not actually believe that, but they're more than happy to create a false reality for a lot of people to believe in. And here's the thing is, I know a lot of people who are probably going to see this episode that are involved in UFO Twitter are probably so fucking pissed off and yelling at their car or their fucking screen right now at me for saying this. But that's not the point. The point is to listen to what I'm saying and understand is this, I'm not speaking fact. I'm speaking hypothetical. These are opinions, much like your thoughts are your opinions. You believe that aliens are real, it's an opinion. You believe it's a weather thing, it's an opinion. The idea here is trying to find a conclusion to it that is not aggressive, but more on the lines of passive conversation. That's an exchange of thought. And that's what I'm trying to get across in this whole entire long fucking rant I had, is that that's an important thing to do because you start to hinder your own progress when you're more than happy to burn down someone else's.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of, once again, incentive for the government to have divisions in these groups. And when you look back on the history of the United States' domestic intelligence programs, like, through the FBI and stuff, you see that they have been very effective at identifying risk groups and then breaking them up. Like the United States, like the FBI infiltrated unions and Black civil rights groups and all this stuff, and internally successfully canceled these movements more effectively than in many places in the world. Like, I mean, union membership just declined for decades in the United
They
States.
shot Martin
Whereas,
Luther King
arguably, I mean,
outside of a hotel room.
Yeah, I mean, is it that one? I don't know if that one's proven, right? But
Look it
there's
up.
a good
Look it up right now. You have to, because it's going to seem racist if we don't now. On your computer
no,
right
only
now.
yeah.
I'm about to say on your
Okay,
computer
yeah.
right now, look up Martin Luther King shot outside of hotel room. There's a whole account.
Yes, yeah, he was assassinated on the second floor balcony of that hotel. I don't know, the gunman never was identified, right? But
He
there
was.
are good he was. Okay, well, I'm
Yeah,
totally off base on that.
in the article before his name, they put racist assassin, and it's like you just had to
okay.
add the racist thing in there.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he's a
So I mean,
government probe.
well, that's the thing. There good reasons why they would want to have that happen, or something like if they knew there was, and this is just speculative, but if they knew there was an assassination plot, they would maybe leave it, right? And now in terms of Martin Luther King Jr., just very briefly, like they had programs, specifically like the FBI was photographing him with his mistress, and then sending
I said that people called me racist. I was like, no, it's not. He was cheating on his wife and he was smoking a cigarette because they took the cigarettes out of his pocket.
Right. Okay. So exactly. So yeah, the government does things that are so blatantly like wrong from looking back on it that almost anything's believable, right? And it's almost like the same thing with UFOs, where there are reasons why the United States government might want to encourage people to think oh, this is like an outrageously advanced technology that like you can't even conceive how it works. Like, you know, you can imagine that there's a sort of intimidation component there that you know, a foreign government would be like, oh, do they like, if there's even a question that, for example, the Nimitz Tic Tac was an American missile test that's hypersonic to the point of traveling 60 kilometers in 4 seconds or whatever it was, 60 miles, then you know, there is a disincentive to attack there. So it's like with all of this stuff, there are competing interests, but then there are also interests that align. And I think that a lot of this stuff sort of merges together into a kind of cohesive whole around the UFOs, where you're UFO Twitter. I engaged in it sincerely, looking for answers, and I've met a bunch of good people on there
There's a
who
lot in
are
there.
also looking for answers. But then there are people who I would say are bad faith arguers. They are not engaging on the information. They aren't stimulating curiosity. It's just sort of working backwards from a predetermined conclusion. I am very open that based on the information, I will change my opinion. If new information comes out showing that the Project Condyne report, for example, was a fake, I would 100% accept that and discount it and then look back on things, because like I think I mentioned previously, for a time, I was convinced that these were vessels being controlled by some kind of intelligence. And I thought the most likely explanation was a non-human intelligence. But once I saw the science showing that there's a high probability that these EM phenomena are in the atmosphere, and the British government in their report for the prime minister saying, "Oh, we believe that it's almost certain that they are these things," that just convinced me that that's probably what's going on. But I'll change my opinion with new information. But you know, it's like everything tossed together, shaken up, and sort of you know, let it fall where it is. You've got this huge mess of information, and when you're struggling to figure out exactly what's going on, and then you start looking at the government statements, like the United States Air Force saying, you know, there are UFOs, but they're not a threat. It's like, well, how do you know they're not a threat if they're unidentified? Mitt Romney coming out on that interview where, you know, and he's a senator, and he says, well, they aren't ours, they aren't foreign adversaries, but they aren't a threat. And it's
I love
like,
how
is
you
that just a
changed your
slip up?
voice.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a touch of Romney there.
But then how do we have
Yeah,
pilots that talk about how the earth is flat too? So you start to look
right.
and start to question a little bit of like, what the hell do you believe? And I think this is the point where you shouldn't have a definitive answer in anything. People don't care about anything that's not their own viewpoint. Not everybody, but a lot of people, these argumentative people, for instance, that we're talking about on UFO Twitter, they just like to rile things up. They like to believe what they want to believe, and they'll shut down anybody because they don't want to be told that maybe they're not right. It's a sense of feeling right. That's why I get mad about the lab thing. I start seeing every fucking article talking about it now, like it's a now more of a possibility. Oh, it's hindered by China. It's like you did a goddamn government presidential in whatever investigation into it, and it comes up inconclusive. I've never fucking heard that in my entire life. But okay, so, as much as I side with this, I know people and I'm friends with that don't believe it at all. They're getting a little bit more skeptical now, the more information that keeps coming out about it. But I don't know. We don't know. We don't have those facts. We don't have that information yet. The idea and the pursuit of fact is the fucking scariest and dumbest thing I've ever seen, because always trying to label something and put something in a peg. And I think this is why this is probably a huge issue. The UFO thing in particular is because you can't. There's nothing in your brain to be able to understand Project Blue Beam or why the hell people are talking about certain blue lights of coming from the sky and I was abducted, and when I was 12 years old my dad never bought me a bike. And then there's like all this shit where it's like it's hard to explain and label these types of things, and I think that's kind of the point of it all, is that we have to wait for a conclusive investigation to be done on it before we sit here and fight back and forth. The most that we can do is keep petitioning, joining forces. If anything, a government that's keeping all this secret doesn't want you to join forces. They don't want you even addressing the situation. When the black Panther Party started teaming up and talking about ways to actually get a lot of major moves happening. This is when they started getting insurrection from the inside, which was a government influence. So I started to look
Mhm.
at like when you're together, they'll do anything to tear you apart. Do I think your government's bad? No, your government's a strong symbol, but the people in it necessarily don't want you to have all your ducks in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another interesting point, like the project to kind of get a conclusive report on this subject. If you look back in history, you see like there was Project Blue Book, which was the United States Air Force's public-facing program to track and monitor UFO sightings. And they had the chair of the astrophysics department, J. Allen Hynek from, I think it was Northwestern University. He was in charge of it, right? And went around doing interviews. He was a skeptic at first. And then when he kept speaking, he never saw a UFO, but he kept speaking to more and more people. And his conclusion was like, he says, like, it's possible, but I don't think all of these people are insane. So there's something there. And then by 1985, he was on the ground in Hesdalen, Norway, looking at the results of a multi-sensor field study that, I mean, it depends if you believe, in quotes, the scientists or not, but the field report from 1984 demonstrates that objects that are comparable to what people describe as UFOs seem to be naturally occurring phenomena in the atmosphere. There's some reasons why they occur at a higher rate in that particular valley and why it's subject to study. But what you see is this ongoing sort of government control system to try to manage this information. And Project Blue Book is comparable, I think, in many ways to what's going on right now, the initiation stages. And it concerns me in some ways that this is being sort of grabbed with both hands with joy by a lot of people on UFO Twitter. They're very happy that the government is, in quotes, taking it seriously, like the budget this year for Congress. They're including language to start a UFO investigation program. But this is just, we're just doing history all over again. When Blue Book got founded, it's like, oh, they're taking it seriously. The entire purpose of the public facing program is to control public opinion to their ends. And that's why I like declassified documents that they fought to hide until it gets forced to be released through the courts. That is the real information. It's, I mean, you could say that maybe it's not, but that's what I believe is the most credible, and then that's where the story sort of moves away from this sort of public facing account where they end up always, like Blue Book ended with the Condyne committee report in 1969. And that was an, in quotes, independent University of Chicago a group of professors who were commissioned by the Air Force to investigate all of the data that they collected over the 20 years. And that report determined that there's no evidence to suggest it's aliens. It's a variety of mundane things, and then they include. Then it's never, once again, because it contradicts the ET hypothesis. It's included in there saying, in our investigation of UFO phenomena, various novel elements of physical phenomena such as atmospheric electricity, is what they call it, came to our attention. And then they say these things are currently under investigation by the Department of Defense and NASA. And then, 40 years later, we're seeing NASA coming out with, sonic boom reduction programs based around plasma technology and things like that. So it all ties in together, but I'm very skeptical of this new program that the government's doing. And I think that they're just sort of trying to stamp it out, just like they already did historically.
What do you think about the fact that the most mind-blowing thing might be every single person who's trying to be in the paranormal or contact spirits might actually be talking to these metaphorical aliens?
Yeah. So, okay, here's the thing. I think that almost everybody is I think that almost everybody's genuine. I think most people are sincere and are like reporting accurately what they experience. A really interesting thing about electromagnetism is that you can put somebody into a lab and it's lab reproducible to expose their brain to various kinds of electromagnetism. You can have a high degree of fluctuation and intense thing, or a very concentrated beam into exact parts of the brain. And you can trigger things that perfectly resemble paranormal experiences. If you focus electromagnetism into a particular region of the brain, this is lab reproducible, you can trigger the experience of seeing a ghost. And it's the exact effect of sensing a presence, even if it's been well studied. They put people into an empty room and they still have these people, when subjected to this exact electromagnetic, energy field, reporting that they know that someone is watching them, and that it depends on their mood and all these things, actually kind of similar to psychedelics in various ways. But they sense that it's either a benign presence or a malevolent presence. It's all stuff that's reported in sort of these ghost experiences, and also UFO experiences. Often they, especially with the black craft triangle things, very frequently connected experience is that the person looking at the object knows that they are watching, and they know that the object knows that they are looking at it, and
That just sounds
it's
like a
incomprehensible.
stoner fucking mashup right there.
Well, okay, exactly, and that's what's kind of cool about it, right? It's that like there are electromagnetism in the brain has parallels to certain psychedelics, and they can actually produce open eye hallucinations using electromagnetism in the lab. And that's when it gets really interesting, is that these things where it's like, if there really are these plasma balls and then they approach you very closely, the fluctuation in electromagnetic energy could produce open eye visual hallucinations. So then if you're seeing the object and it's real and it approaches you, then you potentially would be hallucinating an experience of aliens and stuff. And we were talking earlier about it's just reminded me of how like there aren't reports of aliens in history, and that's absolutely correct for the most part. But what you do see are accounts of fairies taking people to fairyland. And what's a fairy? When you look at a fairy in history, it's a ball of light. And that's how it's depicted. And so if a ball of light comes at you, you culturally construct the resulting hallucination, and you black out from the intense exposure of electromagnetism. Same thing has happened in reports from people who were approached by UFOs in J. Allen Hynek's research. You have this ball of light approach you. There's arguments that since atmospheric plasma can sometimes strike humans, like for example, lightning is atmospheric plasma, it strikes people. And it's actually kind of funny because, in history, lightning was indisputably attributable to an intelligence, right? A superhuman intelligence. It wasn't argued. And if you did argue that, you'd be killed for questioning the gods. And so in our modern world, are these plasma balls a continuation of sort of that psychology? And if you sort of separate out aliens and it's more like an experience with something, then you can actually see a lot of parallels like that. And I could go on, like in the Bible, like blinded by the light, Saul on the road to Damascus. If you look at the exact verses, it says they saw a light, it approached him, he then saw and heard things that his servants did not see and hear. And then he has symptoms that are described as consistent with electromagnetic radiation poisoning for 2 or 3 days, like the blindness from looking at the light, and then being unable to eat, which is consistent with exposure. And some of J. Allen Hynek's actual research, he didn't make that connection, and it's purely speculative on my part. But I think that you can actually go down this go into this rabbit hole, and you can find parallels in history that it kind of opens it up and makes it very intriguing.
I guess that's why a lot of people believe that aliens are gods in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And J. Allen Hynek, Jacques Vallée was a pupil of J. Allen Hynek in some ways. He's an astrophysicist as well, or an astronomer. I don't know if he's a physicist, but he does computer science stuff historically. Now he's a venture capitalist and things, and he's written a ton of books on the subject. He's one of the most respected intellectuals in the UFO field, and his belief is based on taking eyewitnesses seriously. Now, the way that he kind of ended up approaching it was that he determined that these are interdimensional beings.
Well, that's just through
They,
taking psychedelics. You'll be able to realize that everyone has this group high of seeing some type of like creatures they can't explain and they speak or they point to some type of thing that has this sudden realization. This is why there's a whole group of people that think these things are positive. And I'm like, I just think your brain's going through a weird, funky flex, but maybe you can see a different dimension. Bigfoot might be interdimensional. That's why only
yeah,
some people can see him. I mean, it's hard to account for the fact that in the Tibetan mountains has the same account or descriptions of a giant beast, just like Bigfoot over here in North America. It might just be the Yeti in a different version. There's some subtle differences, but they had the same thing. Might just be a group high, like a spear creature that comes out of your fucking cybin mushrooms. I mean, the fact that we even
yeah.
have astrology and all these kind of like horoscopes are all because from people taking peyote and looking up at the stars and seeing a fish come out of a fucking vase.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, so like that's the thing. It's hard to talk about, and I've gotten some flack here and there from eyewitnesses because I understand the experience that it sounds like I'm not taking them seriously if I say that like they're
That's not your fault
con
though. The world, if someone says I saw a UFO, you're like, what? And there's just a
yeah.
pause because not a lot, that's a rare thing. It's kind of like saying I've seen like a quadruple rainbow. Everyone's like, that's not possible. You know, there can be two. Hell, you know, there can be three, but four, governments experiment with some weather shit.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good example, exactly. But I mean, it's even different because it's like if like I'm taking seriously that they actually saw something, and I accept the possibility that the information that I'm using to base my opinion on is incorrect. Like it could always be wrong, right? I could always be corrected, and I've corrected myself from exposure to new information many times on many subjects through my life. Otherwise, I would be very stuck in my ways and stuff like that. I like to learn. I'm very honestly curious, and this is part of why I like this subject so much, because there's so much to always be learning and gathering new information on. Like so these historic potential connections, like when I was reading medieval accounts of being taken to fairyland, and then I see that it's like, oh, a ball of light comes and approaches you, and then you black out, and then you wake up and you have memories of XYZ, and then you see that and you make the connection to modern day UFO accounts that, I was reading in one of J. Allen Hynek's books. A ball of light approaches somebody, they black out, they wake up, they remember an experience. It's like mind blowing. And I love that feeling of like, wow, what the heck? Is this actually what's going on? And my mind is always open, but it has to be grounded in evidence. It can't be working backwards from a predetermined conclusion. If you do that, then you're just sort of I mean, you're just sort of working in a religious sense almost, right? It's like that's what religious philosophy is based around. It's like, since the Bible's true, how can we explain this thing that otherwise is
Yeah.
incomprehensible? And that's the type of thing that I see with Mitt Romney and stuff when he says like, they aren't theirs, they aren't ours, they aren't a threat. It's like, how, under what conditions could somebody who knows what these are say that?
I'm going to end it on that Mitt Romney quote, but my brain's cracked from UFO Twitter. I've been diving too heavy into AI, so I'm like all about AI, and I have so much in my brain right now where I feel like I'm about to snap. Um, where can people find you, Campbell? I appreciate you for doing my show again, man.
Oh, I really love talking to you. You always
I'm
make
gonna
me
talk to you
think.
about Fairyland next. Holy shit, we should be
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about that.
a whole episode just for Fairyland.
Oh
Yeah.
my god.
Yeah, so I'm most active just on Twitter. So I mean, my name's Campbell Moreira, and it's twitter.com/UAP study. And that's my website as well, uapstudy.com. And it's, all free. I'm not monetizing anything. I'm just trying to like share information, get ideas. Cause I take the subject seriously and I want to know what it is. And if I'm wrong, I want somebody to correct me on anything I'm saying, because I want to know the truth. I don't want to like argue my point. So yeah,
But it
Twitter.
has to be grounded in evidence.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Correct me with evidence, not with pure opinion.
Or someone saying, I've seen it. It's like, okay, well, sorry, I can't. We don't have the technology to pull that memory out and be able to. We could do a group high and I could probably see what you saw.
Yeah, the CE5 or whatever. Yeah, let's all get out in the desert and see
Yeah.
things together,
We
right?
gotta we gotta talk about that one next time too, because my buddy was all like, "You can summon them." I'm like, "I'm not paying $10 for a fucking app."
Yeah, well, and even Kevin Day, the radar operator for Nimitz on Demi Lovato, was saying if you play whale songs, they come to you now, and it's like, oh, geez, come on.
I tried to do that with Frank Sinatra, the one of his old records, because I know you can play records backwards, and I was like, "In the name of Shakespeare," and I'm like trying to play it backwards to be able to get it, but nothing.
Okay, well, yeah, better luck next time, right?
But all right, thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.